Hey, it's Chris, the Supply Chain Doctor. Over the years, I've interviewed some of the brightest minds and successful leaders in supply chain management. In May 2020, I sat down with supply chain leader Ken Ackerman to learn more about him and collect a little supply chain management history. After the interview, Ken told me about a similar interview he had with Dr. Jim Stock many years prior, and the related work Dr. Stock did. In November 2020, I was able to catch up with Dr. Stock to learn about him and his work. As an academic in the world of transportation, logistics, and what we now call supply chain management, Jim was well connected to many of the original academic thought leaders in the space. Jim did interviews with many of these thought leaders and shared them with me. The list includes Ken Ackerman, Don Bowersox, James Heskett, Bud Lalonde, John Langley Jr., Tom Menser, Tom Spee, and Daniel Wren. To carry on the great work started by Dr. Jim Stock, I'm dusting off these interviews and bringing them to you to help you get a better understanding of supply chain management and hopefully become a more effective supply chain professional.
Now, if I could have your three children here and ask them this question, how do you think they would answer? The question would be, describe your father. What would they say?
It would probably be based on what they've observed. I think they would say, maybe not in these words, strongly devoted to our mother, supportive, intolerant of chaos. They have seen me at the immigration entrance in the Dallas airport try to organize crowds of hundreds of people into orderly lines. Well, they were cringing over in the corner, embarrassed to death.
And were you able to do that, by the way?
You know, it's amazing what one or two people can do. Yes. It took, in a milling crowd, if you say stop, people will generally stop. I think that those are some of the things they say.
Okay. Looking back at your parents and you as a parent, do you think you were more like your mother or your father as a parent to your children?
Probably more like my father. More straightforward, person of fewer words, but the words count, that sort of thing. That was what my father was all about. I think he probably was a greater influence on me than my mother.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've mentioned and talked about Marilyn several times, and you mentioned going to the discussion groups at the faculty member's house. How did you first meet her? And I'm assuming that was not your first date with her to that discussion group.
No. Oh, I saw her across a room in a fast food restaurant and appealed to a friend of who was actually going with one of her friends to set up a blind date for us. So the four of us went to a Louis Armstrong concert. Actually, it was a dance, although we didn't dance, as I recall. And that was our first meeting. So I literally met her at the door of her dormitory. That was when we first met.
And 54 years later, it still continues.
It's amazing how these things happen, isn't it?
Yes. Now, sort of general questions. You're a well-read man, and you've been involved in lots of activities and so forth. If you could live in any historical era of the past, when and where would it have been?
One of those times would have been Paris in the 20s, during that time or maybe in the in the 1890s, during the time of tremendous cultural development and discussion and the like.
If you could be anyone in history, who would you choose to be?
Oh boy, anyone in history. What a question, huh?
Where there's no wrong answers.
Yeah, right.
The kind students love.
I see. Well, I suspect that it would have been pretty hard to match Abraham Lincoln on that score for all kinds of reasons.
And if you had an opportunity of meeting any historical person that had lived, who would that have been? And sit down for an hour and just discuss.
I'll give you an idiosyncratic answer, because I was, being a jazz musician, there were certain giants in that field that nevertheless were extremely well versed in a variety of topics. And on my instrument, Charlie Parker was one of those icons whom I never saw perform. I'd give a lot to be able to sit down with him for an hour if he'd say anything to me.
Oh, I'm sure he'd have lots to say from his experiences. From Jim Heskett, the person, we talked earlier and about a number of areas. Other than being a musician, is there any other, what we call intriguing fact or little known bit of information about Jim that people would like to hear?
Another would be the devoted Red Sox fan. We try to be at opening day no matter where they are playing. We didn't make it to Tokyo last year, but have made it to several other cities in the United States, and maintain a part of a season ticket which is administered by a colleague, marketing colleague that you may be familiar with, a guy named Steve Grazer, who is an equally strong Red Sox fan. A ticket that we have owned probably for 35 years, so which is the way these tickets tend to work with the Red Sox. So a very devoted Red Sox fan with at least one son who is equally devoted.
Looking both personally and professionally, if you had to limit yourself to one answer, what in your life would be the thing you were most proud of?
Maybe it's the body of work in several academic areas. One might say, well, why didn't you work on one during your lifetime and really do a good job of it? But what I've really tried to do is to develop some bodies of knowledge in at least two areas that may have some longevity.
Well, as you look back, you've been highly productive your whole career in terms of articles, books, presentations, case studies, and so forth. Would you have done anything differently at this point?
I can't think about anything that I would have done differently. I'm really excited about not only the way things have gone, but the way things are going now. And I don't have significant enough regrets that would lead me to say that there's something that I wish I had done differently.
At some point in the future, when there is no Jim Heskett anymore, and we hope that's many years in the future, how do you think people will remember you?
Well, I've always joked that I'd like to have on my gravestone, he came out even. But I suppose we're remembered to some extent by our children. So I would like to be like, I want them to have the greatest success. In terms of ideas, I suspect it would be contributions to the field, one or two contributions maybe to the field of logistics, some total cost analysis work, or the service profit chain ideas in service management that would have some enduring use to someone, recognizing the fact that ideas go out of fashion very rapidly.
It's hard to believe you might have spare time, but all of us try to make time for hobbies or recreation. What do you do in your spare time?
I like to garden if there is a place to garden. So, and that's a community activity. That's something that Marilyn likes to to do. Obviously, I do a lot of reading, some for pleasure, but actually all of it for enjoyment. If I had the opportunity and the space, I would build a model railroad, something that I have planned to do for years. I get Model Railroader magazine every month and read it and salivate and think about what I would do if I had the place for something like that. And obviously, I enjoy music and practicing the piano and things of that sort, which are and languages. I'm interested in languages that I suppose relate to travel destinations.
Okay. So you must have developed the interest in railroads while you were in transportation with Gate and Germain.
I suppose, but I had a Lionel train when I was a kid growing up too. So this goes back a ways, and my father couldn't wait until I was 4 or 5, whatever the age was, too young to have a model railroad or a toy train.
Okay.
So it was for him, I think, not for me.
Okay. Well, super. You mentioned relationships and people and other things. What role do cultural things, religious activities, interfacing with friends and colleagues? What role does that play in the constitution of Jim Heskett?
Obviously, the kinds of activities in which you can exchange ideas are very important. So that involves friends. We're fortunate in having friends strewn all over the world, so that when we travel, we can generally reconnect. Those kinds of relationships, experiences with our kids, the kinds of things that occur in community activities. I've been a director of the Community Music Center of Boston and a charity called the Window Shop. Some other activities in and around Boston, and those all engage us with a number of other people too. My wife is on the board of a school called the North Bennett Street School, and that's another kind of community to which we relate. Our condominium, on which she serves as a board member, which brings us in closer contact with our neighbors. So it really involves ideas and people.
As you look back at your career, 40 plus years in academic environment, what would you say the main lessons that you've learned?
First of all, I think you have to be yourself. You have to march to your own beat. If you wait for others to define your career for you, you can wait a long time, and as you well know, you won't have a very successful institutional life in the kinds of activities in which we engage. I think that the whole idea of carrying your own share of the load in terms of an academic community is really important. Doing things that you really enjoy doing and are excited about getting out of bed in the morning to do, really important, because those who are doing things because it requires jumping, the equivalent of jumping through a hoop, and are not enjoying it, will communicate that. It'll be reflected in their work. There are probably many other bits of advice, but I think you really have to be quite assertive in following those ideas about which you can really get excited.
Now, some people look back and see turning points in their lives. It could be job change, military, birth of a child, marriage. What would be the turning points in Jim Heskett's life?
Well, I suppose the biggest turning points were the point at which my Army buddy advised me to get an MBA, which was preceded by my parents assuming that I would go to college, and followed by the advice from Gate and Germain that I get a doctorate and follow an academic career. Those would be probably the three biggest turning points for me.
Unrelated, just a curiosity question. Did your Army friend who eventually was head of Catalina, did he get an MBA from somewhere else?
No.
No.
He did not ever pursue his MBA.
Never got it. Okay.
Didn't seem to have suffered very much.
No, I'm sure not. As you know, here in Harvard has a PhD program. What advice would you give PhD students today?
I think in a world of complexity that we are engaged with today, there are huge numbers of opportunities for research that really means something, and that the advice that I would give a PhD is to keep your eye on the goal, that is, to finish, but at the same time, again, to select a dissertation topic and a research pattern that is well structured, but also one about which you can be excited, because there are days when excitement is going to pull you through and allow you to survive. Try to do something useful, but not save the world at the level of the dissertation, because you have to remember to serve yourself as well.
When you and I entered the academic arena, you much earlier than me, the environment was different. What would you say are the most significant changes that have occurred in the academic arena since you began your career?
In the academic arena, it seems to me that at least in business schools, we've become more closely engaged with the community that we study, and in all kinds of ways. We've probably given greater credence in recent years to empirical research, and in some cases anecdotal research. When I first entered the academic world, it was the world of the Ford and the Carnegie studies, and if you weren't quantifying and dealing with quantitative methods, you were basically a nobody. And so we developed an entire generation of faculty that were highly theoretical in what they did, because facts, empirical facts, this is perhaps a cynical statement, empirical facts, I think sometimes impinged on the theoretical research that they were doing, and obviously made it a lot messier. I think we grew out of that era, and we're in probably a much more balanced era now. I think the tyranny of journal publication is still with us, which has led to some pretty esoteric work, part of some people. But it strikes me that in general, business schools are better grounded in the world in which they work and live, and the world that we need to understand.
Now, Jim, thus far we've been talking about issues that we've discussed on all of our taping sessions with all the men and women that I've talked to and will talk to in the future. Some specific questions to you based upon your interests and background. Coming out of a marketing area where you were in, both in your program and in an early academic career, what caused you to bridge both logistics and then the services marketing arenas? How did you move from that?
First of all, I think I had a natural interest in marketing because of that interest in retailing that I took with me into graduate school. And that led to a doctoral area in marketing. Those were the days when you had to have 4 areas, 2 languages, and probably some other things that don't necessarily exist today. The transportation interest was something that I acquired upon arriving at graduate school, and I suppose as I went through my MBA studies and into the PhD program, it occurred to me that they really were so interconnected that there had to be a good topic, a good area of study there. Fortunately for me, it was early enough in the whole transformation that I didn't have to do a huge empirical study. I could do something that was more conceptual and try to help define a few ideas and how they related to each other. That led me to this interest in I suppose what we now call distribution, but it was more supply chain management really, and an integrated approach from source to customer. It was certainly the interest of my mentor combined with my own interest that led me to this topic and the idea of putting these areas together.
And in terms of early on, you were the recipient of what's now called the Distinguished Service Award by the organization when it first started, National Council of Physical Distribution
Right.
Management. How did you get involved in that early logistics group?
I have a fuzzy memory. I was not a founder, to my knowledge. I don't think I'm on that list. I believe I at least attended the second meeting of that group. By that time it was a full 25 strong or so. I don't remember very many people being there. Most of them were academics, but there were a few practitioners there. I believe that 4 or 5 papers were actually presented at that meeting. We had a kind of a paper-bound proceedings, as I recall. I may still have a copy of one of those. And at that meeting, of course, I met people like Ed Smike and Don Bowersox and some of our mutual friends. One thing led to another, and after several years, I had presented at several of the meetings, and we actually then developed an administrative structure. A guy named George Jekowitz, if you remember George.
Yes.
George and I hit it off pretty well. I believe I was program chairman, if I'm not mistaken, for about the 1970 meeting. I believe it was in Philadelphia. One thing I remember about that program, and the one thing that George never let me forget, was that I engaged a speaker that I had come into contact with through some work on the Kennedy Foundation, which was for Special Olympics and that sort of thing, with a guy somewhere down here who had basically a pyramid selling scheme, which had been very successful. And I had seen him give a talk called Dare to Be Great, and invited him to give this inspirational talk to what was then the National Council of Physical Distribution colleagues. Among other things, in the middle of his speech, he would jump up on the head table and engage in some cheerleading activities. I believe the fellow ended up doing a jail term several years later. I don't remember. And George said he had never forgotten that particular session. So there were some association activities. I guess some of the general writing. I served on a couple of committees. I think we developed, maybe we helped to formulate some ideas for research and that sort of thing that may have led to the nomination. I think they had given it to the other early academics in the process, and maybe I was one that was left over by, was it 1972 or whenever it was? I don't remember.
Are there other professional organizations that have been influential and important in your career?
Well, I suppose the American Marketing Association. I've appeared on several of their programs early on and have obviously been influenced a lot by members of that organization and publications of that organization. I have not been an active member of any other associations. I've really chosen instead to serve as on the editorial boards of some of the professional association publications, Journal of Marketing Research, the Journal of Business Logistics going back, the Journal of International Service Management, so forth, and have decided to sort of try to contribute in that fashion.
Now, as you look at the logistics, and some people would say supply chain management profession today, what do you envision its direction being?
In a general sense, it seems to me that we're going to be, looking into the future, we're going to be dealing with issues related to certainly the entire supply chain from origin to final destination, and it seems to me around a couple of areas. Certainly information, the impact of information on the effective performance of a supply chain. I did a simulation back in the 60s. It was basically a simple classroom simulation, collected some data and concluded that knowledge of inventory throughout the chain had the single biggest beneficial impact on the performance of the entire chain. So at that time, we really didn't have the capability to manage the information through all the players in the chain, let alone the inclination to share it. We certainly have the capability today. The inclination to share it, it seems to me, is perhaps growing if we can prove that it has beneficial effects. And I think probably one big trend in this field will be in sort of comprehensive studies of the impact of information availability on management decisions in the chain. That's one of the things that interests me about the one board that I do sit on at Limited Brands, because we have control of the entire channel from source to ultimate customer, and have spent a very large amount of money to develop the capability to manage that inventory through the entire channel, and are just now realizing the advantages of it. And these are advantages that could be realized by independent companies operating together for a more effective supply chain. I think the other side really has to do with technology going forward, and the impact of technology on what we do in the supply chain and how we plan for various configurations. Obviously, energy and the use of energy efficiency as an objective of certain studies will be important, which leads us into new technologies as well. We're going to be, I think, focusing on the interplay between technology and human inputs. That means the kinds of jobs that people are going to be doing in the supply chain will be changing. The way in which they interrelate with technology will be changing, and so it's going to impact not only our research, I think, but the way we train people to go into the field. It no longer matters whether you can read a tariff, as opposed to understanding the complexities or the possibilities of the effective use of technology.
One last question. Have you ever wished that you could be 30 years old again, knowing what you know now, in order to be part of this future of supply chain management, sustainability, all the other things going on in marketing and distribution?
There's never been a more exciting time in terms of the size of the challenges and the possibilities for meeting them. This next generation is going to encounter challenges that we didn't ever even think about. But at the same time, I think that we will have the technology, the information, one would hope the policies with which to cope with these problems and challenges. And it seems to me this will be an extremely exciting time for research and teaching and learning that we can only sort of imagine at this point. Think of it. 10 years ago, we didn't have email, for example. It seems as if things are moving exponentially, and if they continue to do that, think what this world is going to be like 10 years from now.
Well, Jim, thank you very much for sharing with us something that we won't see in your textbooks and articles, the other side, if you will, of the person. And we hope that the audience has gotten a richer view of not only Jim Heskett's publications and books and articles, but also the man behind those writings.
The Supply Chain Doctor interviews thought leaders and visionaries who have had an impact on the field of supply chain management, shares professional development content for practitioners, and investigates current and future trends in the industry. Interested in sponsoring this show to help get your message out? Send a note to chris@thescdr.com. Thank you for listening.